Hello and welcome to the 2026 HURREVAC training webinar series. We put on this training annually, and it's intended as both an orientation for brand new users to the HURREVAC program, as well as a refresh for anyone who's coming back to using it in this hurricane season. So if we can all turn on our cameras at this point, just so that people get a little familiar with us. I am joined by Dr. Michael Brennan at the National Hurricane Center in Miami, and I'm also joined by Franny Bowie, who is the National Hurricane Program co-manager at the Army Corps of Engineers in the Baltimore District. So at this point, I'm Karen Townsend with Sea Island Software. We are the longtime operations and maintenance and developer of the HURREVAC program. Glad to be with you today. So we are going to turn off all but Dr. Brennan's camera and let him share his screen because he has a few slides and comments to make to kick us off.
Okay, great. Thanks, Karen. Thanks to everybody for joining today. It's great to have such a big turnout. I see over 940 people and still counting. So it's a great opportunity to engage with such an important group of core partners as we're now, a couple weeks into the 2026 hurricane season. So I wanted to provide a quick update on the seasonal forecast and some new products and services we have here at the Hurricane Center, and then take any questions you might have as we head into the end of the several days of the webinar here. So just a quick reminder, I'm guessing most folks have already seen these, but NOAA's 2026 hurricane season outlooks came out in late May. So on the Atlantic side, now that we officially have El Nino in place and it's expected to strengthen as we enter those traditional peak hurricane season months of August, September, October, the most likely outcome in the Atlantic at what NOAA's forecasting is a below normal season, but there are still going to be plenty of storms. The forecast ranges for NOAA's seasonal forecast are 8 to 14 named storms, 3 to 6 hurricanes, 1 to 6 major hurricanes. We have a 55% chance of below normal activity, but a 35% chance, about 1 out of 3, that we could end up near normal. And if you see the top range, the top end of those forecast ranges are pretty close to sort of normal levels in the Atlantic. One thing I'll point out is that El Nino, when it gets strong, tends to shut down tropical cyclone formation or make it a lot more difficult in parts of the Caribbean and the deep tropical Atlantic, but it can leave more favorable areas a little farther north and closer to home, say in the Gulf or off the east coast of the United States. So we can end up with short fuse systems that can develop, and we could certainly had many seasons with El Nino and otherwise relatively quiet across the basin as a whole, where we've had significant tropical cyclone impacts here in the U.S. Now, on the flip side, with El Nino in place, we are expecting above average seasons in both the Eastern and Central Pacific. You can see there's a 70% chance of above normal activity in both of those basins, expecting up to 22 named storms in the East Pacific, 9 to 14 hurricanes, 5 to 9 major hurricanes. So that's sort of average to, not quite double average, but getting up there in some of those categories. So expecting a very busy season there. And while most of the direct impacts tend to occur in Mexico, Baja California, we do often get the remnants of systems, especially those that move farther north, can bring moisture and heavy rainfall impacts into parts of the southwestern U.S. and even the south central United States as well. And then into the Central Pacific, which includes the Hawaiian Islands, a basin that typically only gets 4 or 5 tropical cyclones a year. We're expecting 5 to 13, which is a much, much busier year for them in that part of the world. And that certainly does increase the threat of some impacts to the Hawaiian Islands this season. But as it always is, the challenge as we go forward into the hurricane season and from across sort of the weather and emergency management enterprise is really to communicate the hazards. We really want to emphasize watches and warnings and hazard products and not get caught up on the category, the storm status, the track of the storm center. We're dealing with a system right now in the Gulf that could become a tropical storm near the Texas coast in the next couple of days. But it might not. It might never ever move offshore, and we might end up with something that's a depression or not even that. But the impacts are really going to still be there regardless, especially on the rainfall side of things. So it's just a great reminder that as we go through the season, we don't want to get too caught up in storm specifics or the track of the center of the storm and really focus on that hazard information that we can provide to all of our customers and partners. Speaking of that, we have a new products and services we're rolling out this year. I won't read through all of these, but I am going to go through them all in a little more detail here. We're going to start off with the cone graphic that is newly operational this year. That includes inland U.S. tropical storm and hurricane wind watches and warnings on the graphic. We experimented with this back in 2024, 2025. This is an example from Hurricane Milton back in October 24, where you can see most of the Florida Peninsula under some type of hurricane or tropical storm watch or warning. And this graphic does a much better job of conveying both coastal and inland wind risk, and is another good visual to show people that hazards and the risk of those hazards often extend well away from the center and away from the cone itself. And the fact that the watches and warnings are displayed over top of that cone are meant to emphasize that. We are also introducing newly operational storm surge products and services for the main Hawaiian Islands. These have been available for the continental U.S. going back to 2017, and were introduced for the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico several years ago, and now they will be available for Hawaii. And that includes the issuance of the storm surge watch and warning 48 to 36 hours prior to the onset of storm surge inundation, to really highlight those areas at risk of that life-threatening inundation from storm surge, and help reinforce any evacuation decisions made by emergency managers in those areas. We will also have the peak storm surge graphic, which you see up here. And that's a high-level briefing graphic that shows the forecast inundation above ground level along the immediate coast in areas that are under that storm surge watch or warning. And then we also have the potential storm surge flooding map or inundation graphic over here on the right. And that graphic shows a reasonable worst case scenario of inundation above ground level that's meant to be a planning tool for emergency managers and other decision makers, that accounts for the safety margin that if the storm gets stronger or takes a track closer to a particular area, it's that reasonable worst case scenario that you should be planning for. And these products, especially the inundation graphic, could be available as much as 72 hours prior to landfall, depending on the level of forecast confidence. So those will be available on hurricanes.gov this year. The graphical tropical weather outlook, we're making a small change, but should be helpful in terms of messaging. For disturbances where the chance of formation is near 0% for the entire 7-day period, they will now be denoted with a gray X instead of a yellow X, which we used to use for anything with a less than 40% chance of development. But this helps users differentiate systems that have some chance of development, 10% or greater, that'll have that yellow X, versus those that are either, we're just mentioning because they're a rainfall threat or because their chance of development has decreased substantially and now is not expected. So it'll be an easier way to identify systems that you need to be worried about or don't need to be worried about from at least a tropical cyclone formation perspective. And that's in place now for this ongoing hurricane season. And that will be true on both the 2-day and the 7-day graphic. So you'll see that gray X show up on both of those products as long as the formation chance is near 0% over the entire 7-day period. We are in the process of rolling out a new mobile-friendly version of hurricanes.gov at hurricanes.gov/mobile. This is already out there, and it does a really nice job of scaling to whatever size screen you're using, a mobile device, a tablet, or your desktop computer. I've been using it almost exclusively to look at our webpage since it rolled out, and it's a really nice upgrade. It has some really nice new features, nice ways to visualize not just the graphical tropical weather outlook, but the storm graphics, the storm advisory products. It gives us a lot more flexibility to post the most important information for the most important storm up here at the top of the website as well. So it's live now. We are going to be adding additional features as we go through the hurricane season. So I encourage you to check it out, provide us any feedback you might have. The current version of hurricanes.gov will remain in place at the normal URL, so that will always be there as well. But the mobile site will be undergoing upgrades throughout the season. I want to touch on a new experimental cone of uncertainty that we're going to be working with this year, and this is out there as well now, and it's really designed to improve the representation of the track forecast uncertainty. So historically, the operational cone has been created by drawing circles around each of the forecast points that you see here coming up on the left. And those circles are drawn so that based on our historical track error of the last 5 years, the forecast center would fall inside the circle about 2/3 of the time. But that was assuming that the errors were actually distributed in a circular way around the forecast point. And we actually know that's not the case, especially at longer lead times, particularly in the Atlantic. There's more uncertainty in the forward speed, or what we call the along track error, compared to the cross track error, the left-right component of the forecast track. So the new experimental cone that you see on the right is designed in a similar way, but instead of using circles, it's using ellipses that account for the different components of the track forecast error at those forecast lead times. And it's also drawn using the 90th percentile of those along and cross track errors. So it becomes the likely path of the center, with the storm center staying inside the ellipses 90% of the time. So it's a lot easier to talk about and message. And if you'll notice, if you compare these two cones for Milton back in 2024, they look pretty similar. And the new cone, even using the 90th percentile, because most of the track forecast error at those longer lead times is more along track, the cone doesn't get that much wider. It's about 20% bigger. So to just visually at the first level, it's not that much bigger of a cone. It's a lot easier to talk about. Here's another way of comparing the two. The current cones based on the forecast circles is shown in the dashed red line. The new experimental cone based on the along and cross track errors is shown in the white outline. The other nice thing it does is this sets us up to start incorporating situational forecast uncertainty into what the cone looks like in future years. To do that, we're going to have to start using different shapes and sizes of the cone. So this is kind of a first step down that road. Even though this is still using statistical errors over the past 5 years, in the future, we'll be able to start incorporating actual forecast uncertainty. So the cone's going to start looking a little different as we go through the next few years, but this is that first step down that path this season. I did want to touch a little bit on recent fatality trends and our latest update to these data set. This is looking at continental United States direct and indirect hurricane and tropical storm deaths from 2013 to 2025. The direct deaths from the forces of the storm itself are on the left, and the indirect deaths are on the right. So if you look at the direct fatalities, you continue to see that freshwater flooding from rainfall has been by far and away the biggest killer in tropical storms and hurricanes in the United States over the last 12 to 13 years, responsible for more than half of the fatalities. It's followed by wind, which is responsible for about 1 in 5, and then surf and rip currents, a little over 10%, and storm surge right at about 10%. If you remember older versions of these graphics that went from the 1960s up to 2012, storm surge was responsible for about half of the fatalities. So we've done a great job as a community, not just on the forecast side, but as an entire sort of hurricane enterprise, from planning to ordering evacuations, better communication, the storm surge watch warning, driving that storm surge mortality down to about 10% of the direct deaths, despite the fact that we've had 25 hurricane landfalls in the United States in the last 13 years. We are focusing also on surf and rip currents, the freshwater flooding aspect, which can occur again anywhere, hundreds of miles away from where a storm makes landfall, and is almost totally unrelated to how strong the storm is from a wind perspective. On the right are the indirect fatalities, not directly due to the forces of the storm itself, but otherwise would not have occurred if a tropical storm or hurricane had not happened. Most of these are occurring in the aftermath of major hurricane landfalls, when there's widespread damage, power outages, and just a very unsafe post-storm environment. The causes are pretty widely spread out. The biggest cause is just simple accidents related to storm preparation and recovery. There are also a large number of fatalities related to car accidents, heat, carbon monoxide poisoning, cardiac arrest, and lack of access to medical care or equipment. Most of these indirect fatalities tend to affect older adults, particularly men over the age of 60, a demographic in general that's less resilient to this dangerous post-storm environment. And this is, again, something we're starting to message, or trying to message, even before a storm makes landfall, so we can start to message and get information out about post-storm safety before the storm actually hits. A couple other things I want to touch on. These are not new products, but they were new in the last year or two that we're going to continue to emphasize. Again, rip currents have killed more people in tropical storms and hurricanes than storm surge the last 13 years. And we introduced a large-scale rip current risk map on hurricanes.gov last year that combines all of the coastal rip current information that's put out by local National Weather Service offices around the country. It composites it together on one graph. And it's really important to use this and to look at this when you have perhaps a distant hurricane tracking well offshore of the U.S. East Coast. It's a nice day to go to the beach otherwise. The biggest states where we see those rip current related fatalities for hurricanes are Florida, North Carolina, and New Jersey, but they can happen just about anywhere. Post-storm heat risk is another big thing we're trying to message, and that goes back to the heat-related fatalities I just showed on a couple of slides ago. We're working with our partners at the Weather Prediction Center to help identify areas where there could be significant heat risk impacts after a storm due to power loss. So we have the Weather Service Heat Risk product that's produced every day and highlights areas that are at risk of various levels of heat threat all the way out to 7 days into the future. And we can see where that heat coincides with areas where we might, from a tropical storm or hurricane, have some significant power outages. So we can look at, say, the 50-knot wind speed probabilities, which correlate pretty well to significant power issues. And where you see those areas overlap, those are areas where you may want to start messaging that heat risk. And that's something we'll be doing as we go into the season here. So that's all I have. I'll be glad to take any questions, and I'll turn it back over to Karen. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Brennan. We appreciate your presentation and hearing about the new products that are going to be out this year. And John and I, as we demonstrate over the course of this week, will discuss which ones are already in HURREVAC and which ones are coming as well.
Thanks, Karen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us today. So again, wanting to welcome everyone to the 2026 annual webinar. We are really, really grateful that you are taking the time out of your busy day and week to prepare for this season. I will also say I'm going to try to keep my soccer references to a minimum, or I might get subbed out. Okay, so the National Hurricane Program is this interagency federal partnership. It's led by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, so FEMA. FEMA, the Army Corps of Engineers, and NOAA's National Hurricane Center all work really closely together to form, this NHP. FEMA has the congressional authority, the national and regional program managers, in addition to a hurricane liaison team. The Army Corps, myself and Tom Letzo are the national program managers. And within each district office, we also have study managers for hurricane evacuation studies. We sit under the Planning Center of Expertise for Coastal Storm Risk Management. The National Hurricane Center also contributes staff for hurricane specialists, in addition to storm surge products through their technology and science branch. So the goal or mission of the NHP is really to provide technical assistance to you, local, state, tribal, territorial, federal emergency managers. And really this technical assistance that we provide focuses on hurricane evacuation, response. It spans anywhere from like deliberate planning, tabletop exercises, to operational decision support, crisis action planning when these types of tropical events are threatening the U.S. So we, again, do this by providing support, operational decision support, planning support, and training as well. So this graphic shows the FEMA regions and the local states that are being supported. At FEMA, there's James Rogers and Sonny Westcott at headquarters. You'll also see lists of names for liaisons to the National Hurricane Center, the National Water Center, the Weather Prediction Center, and the Storm Prediction Center. So you may be receiving emails from some of these individuals, so you'll recognize some of these names. You can also reach out to those individuals via the hlt@fema.dhs.gov email address. And if there are questions related to overall National Hurricane Program, like high level, you can certainly reach out to me and Tom Letzo as well. You can also direct correspondence to nhp@fema.dhs.gov. But the idea is that within each FEMA region, you have a point of contact that you can reach out to. Megan Wells, Chris Moore, Josh Rapp, Mike Builder, Brandon Belinsky, Rebecca Moulton, Ari Thomas, and right now we don't have anyone specifically assigned to FEMA Region 9, but we overall as a team are trying to support that. So again, would certainly recommend you reaching out to either NHP or the HLT FEMA emails. You've heard Dr. Brennan speak just now. Again, there's many other individuals within the National Hurricane Center and within the Army Corps of Engineers, a cadre of folks that are supporting this whole program. There's not enough room on this slide to list everyone, but you may hear from Dan Brown, Cody Fritz, Robbie Berg later on this week. Certainly, again, there's a lot of other individuals behind the scenes that are supporting this effort. So what does the National Hurricane Program actually provide? There are a list of products and services. So products in terms of forecast features, like we're going to get into, those are provided by the National Hurricane Center. In addition, storm surge modeling is another product that is provided by the NHC. Using the information from the storm surge modeling, in addition to other hazards, we collectively work on these hurricane evacuation studies. We'll get into that a lot more in day 4 and kind of the details and the mechanics of that. But ultimately, all 3 of those products are digested and then shown in HURREVAC. So Karen, after I get through my presentation, will be speaking a little bit more and giving everyone kind of a tour of what HURREVAC is. I've already mentioned, I don't need to mention again, kind of the services that the NHP provides. And ultimately, both the products and the services, we're really trying to give you information on how to make your informed decisions when it comes down to, thinking about the public safety as well as what it might take for a hurricane evacuation. HURREVAC is short for hurricane evacuation. It is the NHP's storm tracking and decision support tool for government emergency managers. The program does track hurricanes, tropical cyclones. It uses the information from NHC for forecast and advisory products. And then it combines information with data from the various state hurricane evacuation studies. Again, to give you local emergency managers what time an evacuation should start. We are not making those decisions by any means, but HURREVAC is designed to help you make those decisions. HURREVAC overall calculates what those evacuation start times are going to be based on the timing and potential severity of storm hazards. But again, ultimately, that information and that decision does lie with you. So HURREVAC is restricted to government emergency management use. So the idea is that this includes both emergency managers at the federal level, the local level, and we really do encourage new users to register with their official employment email addresses and really to detail what your role is in emergency management. We know it's hurricane season right now, but users are really accessing HURREVAC throughout the year. So real-time data means real-time. That information is available. During major hurricanes, HURREVAC also scales up to let thousands of different users simultaneously use HURREVAC to track the storm and to leverage those tools. So there are a series of different use cases for HURREVAC, and really it's a resource. This is to supplement the plans and tools that you also have at your fingertips. From a planning support standpoint, you have the ability in HURREVAC to develop storms, simulated storms. So you could put something together that would be very specific to your, jurisdiction. It's also a really good tool to understand what your storm surge risk is. It also helps to evaluate your decision timelines, the hurricane evacuation studies, the information and the reports are all posted there, in addition to evacuation clearance times, which is the time it takes for someone to reach a point of safety. So that information is also made available. And really the idea is you can use this as a what if scenario and really considering all the different scenarios that might be available to support your planning, your training, and your exercises. And then from an operational standpoint, one could use it to look at the tropical weather outlook that's automatically updated, to look at and monitor storms, as well as look at forecasts, assess wind speed probabilities, estimate when and the departure of tropical storm force winds. You could look at what storm surge risk is kind of in the present based on, you know, an incoming threat. It also is to support evacuation decision making and to develop decision timelines. So right now I've really given a broad overview of what HURREVAC does. The next couple of days, we're going to build upon all of that information, and hopefully you'll stick around, and we won't go into stoppage time. Okay, Karen, I'm going to turn it back to you to do the demo. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Franny, and thank you again, Dr. Brennan. I just have a couple more slides, and that's it. Then we're ready to jump into the website and the program itself. So for this demo today, I have about an hour and a half, and I'll take a break about halfway through my demo. And so you'll have 5 minutes to get up and stretch. Our goals today are to understand how to access and navigate the workspace, and it's all handled through a web browser. How to find essential storm information. Is there a live storm right now? Is there a potential for anything to form? How to customize the map and other settings in the program. HURREVAC's designed to be user-friendly. You don't have to have an expertise in GIS in order to make a map and create a situation report that has annotation on it and text-based information. So we will end the day with a short, very short exercise on how to get information out of HURREVAC like that to put together into a briefing. And I skipped over item number 4, that is that we will introduce you to points of interest and areas where you can customize HURREVAC with, say, a base location, and those will be built upon in the coming days as well. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn off my camera again, and we are going to jump into the program itself. There we go. Okay, so this is the support site, HURREVAC.com, and this is where you would go if you were not yet a user of the program, but you were eligible for access. You would click on this sign up button here in the top right corner. There's a short form to fill out. As Franny mentioned, it's important to provide your official email address so that we are able to approve your registration. Typically, those registrations are approved within 24 hours because we know there will be high interest today. We're going to try to approve them faster, but just be aware that because there could be a lot of requests coming in, it may take us a few hours to get to you. So don't expect to sign up right now and be able to jump right in and follow along in the demo. We recommend that you perhaps go back and replay the recording of the demo if you're brand new to HURREVAC and practice side by side with that. So the support site is maintained by Sea Island Software, and you can get in touch with us under support services. We recommend using our email address of support@hurrevac.com. There is a phone number for any kind of urgent needs. There's also a description of the agency sponsors, which Franny just reviewed, that are part of the National Hurricane Program, and frequently asked questions. On the About section, you'll see the kinds of information that introduce you to HURREVAC and all of the functionality. I will go into the key features just to highlight who is eligible for the program. You'll see here the descriptions that match what Franny described. And at this point, I'd like to launch our first of 4 polls today to find out from you what your affiliation is. And so let me give this a try here. So the question is, which of these categories best describes your organization or agency affiliation? You could go ahead and respond to that, and we'll close the poll in about 30 seconds. All right, so typically we have an overwhelming majority or a slight majority of folks from the local. The local jurisdictions that are in the vulnerable coastal locations, that is kind of at the heart of who HURREVAC was designed to assist. So it takes the large synoptic type forecasts coming from the National Hurricane Center, drills down to what the local effects are going to be, what's the severity in terms of severity and timing. But there are still plenty of state and territory oriented folks who look at a little bit broader regions. And then 25% of you are federal. So you might have responsibility for multiple states or regions. And then we have some other non-governmental folks. Oftentimes these come from aid agencies like the Red Cross. All right, so thank you for that. Then also another section of the support site that I'm going to highlight are the training resources. So you probably found out about the training events going on this week through an email or perhaps through an announcement on this website. If you need to get into the recorded videos, they will be located here once they are completed at the end of each day or by the next morning. But there are also a bunch of short videos here and some downloads that you can, some of which were also provided today in the handouts as part of this webinar. But there are short YouTube videos on finding basic storm information, customizing the display, reports, and even a few things on the YouTube channel that aren't mentioned here. So we recommend subscribing to YouTube, to the HURREVAC channel, and watching this site for anything new. How do you find out about what's new? Well, you can keep an eye on the announcements page. And so that will describe changes for the season and training opportunities there as they become available. All right, so that kind of covers the support site and how to get signed up for the program. Next, I'm going to go ahead and click on the login button, and this will launch HURREVAC. It will run in any modern web browser. It can also be run on a tablet, although it's really nice to have access to a mouse and have right-click functionality. The main key is just that you that you have plenty of screen real estate so you can see things well. So this is the way the map looks by default as you come into the program. You'll notice a few things are turned on. There's some things that are lit up, like we're going to explore what's meant by this notifications icon here with the red dot. Before I go anywhere, though, inside of the interface, I'm going to point you to the user guide. So down in the bottom right edge, there's a question mark. And if I click on the question mark, it opens another tab in my browser. And there's a very comprehensive help system here. You can see all the directory structure to it. And you can check out what's new, both for last season, the kinds of things that got updated in the program in terms of data and capabilities. We added the ability to control the river gauge display a little more finely. There were updates in storm surge basins that were completed last year by the National Hurricane Center in coordination with FEMA. So it's always good to check and see what's new. And we will continue to be adding things in 2026 as they get completed, so you can monitor this page as well. But going into the Using HURREVAC section and exploring the workspace, I want to end the user guide demonstration by just pointing out the areas of the program, the general areas of the interface, and how we refer to them. So over here on the left edge, we have the top section is called Map Layers. There are 3 tabs in the Map Layers. The first tab is called Storms. that contains an archive of all the storms going back to 2005 and forward, all the way into the current year and the active storms, and even simulated and exercise storms are available in that list. Then there's a conditions tab. That is a bunch of live layers like satellite and radar and rainfall forecasts and river gauges and tide gauges. Then the resources tab is a collection of other map layers that you can turn on and off that usually are not so weather specific. They might have to do with outlining areas, regions of responsibility. In the bottom left corner is the toolbox. And the toolbox is kind of a catch-all for opening different sections of the program, additional interfaces to control various aspects of it. On the left edge of the large tracking map are a strip of storm tools. They have to do with whatever storm you have turned on the map, being able to control the different depictions of layers that are baked into the forecast for that storm and advisory. And then on the right edge are the map tools and utilities, a lot of controls of zooming and panning on the map, clipping layers, measuring, adding points of interest are all in this section on the right edge. And then there's some utilities down here in the bottom section having to do with user preferences, printing, export, and of course the help system that we are inside of right now. All right, so switching out of the user guide and back into HURREVAC, I'm going to launch a second poll to find out your level of experience with the program. So how would you describe yourself? As advanced, intermediate, new, or returning, but it's been a few years, perhaps you didn't have any storms to worry about last year if you were so fortunate? Okay, thank you for your responses. We do have some advanced users here. Perhaps you've been using HURREVAC through many different platforms. It was previously a Windows desktop-based platform, and if you've really been around a long time, since the late 1980s, you might have even used the DOS-based version of HURREVAC. But most of us are just here for the internet era where everything's in the cloud, and all we need to know to get going is our username and password, which is wonderful. So we have a fair number of you that are intermediate, a lot of new users that have just signed up, so that's great to have you for this full week of webinars. And then some of you who are jumping back into HURREVAC but have some level of familiarity. So thank you for responding to that poll. That helps us in tailoring our training to know the level of experience that you have. All right, so we looked at the workspace and the user guide and talked about the different areas of the program. There were some that were hidden that I'm going to now introduce. One is a context menu. So if you right-click on the screen somewhere, a menu will come up having to do with doing something, taking some action related to where you have just clicked on the screen. So I could set a base location, for instance. I might set it, I'm going to zoom in a bit to where I'm located here in Richmond, Virginia, and set a base location there. Let's see if I get it right. Yes, City of Richmond. And it's put a little flag on my map at that point. There's another way to get to the context menu if you are on a tablet and you don't have right-click functionality with a mouse option. Over here on the bottom left side towards the bottom is a context menu button. It looks like the mouse. And if you click it, you see the same options come up, but now you can do something different with them. So let's say I want to show range marks. And now as I move my cursor, it's followed by a blue dot, and I can click where I want that action to take place. And so I've just added a series of range marks radiating out from Richmond, Virginia. using that context menu and just a different option besides the first one. So how do I get rid of the range marks once they are on? You just need to go back to the context menu, either by clicking again here or by right-clicking on the map, and you would click Clear Range Marks. To remove the base location, this is actually something that's stored in your profile. So once you have a user account, each time you log in, it's going to remember the last place you stored as a base location. That is going to be accessible through user preferences. If you wanted to not have that displayed on the screen, you could go into the user preferences button here and just simply uncheck that, and then it does not show on the screen, but it's still stored in memory in your user profile. It's just that the marker is hidden now. Some other things to know about the interface and trying to get it set up just the way you want for whatever action you're taking right now. There are a couple of slide in and out bars to HURREVAC. So for instance, if you want a big tracking map without all this stuff on the left-hand side, you can collapse that map layers and toolbox section to be just the tracking map itself. And you can also slide out this panel over here, which is partially covered up by this tropical weather outlook, which we'll talk about next. So there's this various things that you can put in this right slide panel that have to do with controlling either storm surge, setting up a simulated storm, or generating reports and looking at their results. This tropical weather outlook is something that's on by default from the start of, or really 15 days before the start of the Atlantic hurricane season. So from May 15th to November 30th, we have the tropical weather outlook on by default, and it is a look at all of the areas of potential formation. Dr. Brennan showed a slide because there was a slight change in how these are going to be depicted this year. I don't have an example right at the moment of the situation where there would be a gray X, but you'll notice in this legend at the very bottom, there is a new item added to the line that has to do with the colors. And so X means that there's no development expected within the next 7-day period. The tropical weather outlook has information about the 2-day period, so the short term as well as the longer term. These X's represent the chance of formation in the next 2 days. And then what I call blobs, the polygon areas, represent the chance of formation in the extended period that goes all the way out to 7 days at this point. If it's yellow, it means there's a relatively low chance of less than 40%. Orange is 40 to 60%. And if we had an area that had high potential for formation, it would be represented in red. And then if there were any active storms being tracked anywhere in the world, you would see their icons using these different types of displays shown at the very bottom. With the tropical weather outlook, you can click on any one of these areas that has the potential for formation. And you'll see the description of it that comes from the text product that the National Hurricane Center puts out. And it has this matching companion information that should match the colors that you see in the legend. So within 48 hours, X is orange, medium chance of 40%. Within the 7-day period, medium chance of 50% for formation. The tropical weather outlook is issued 4 times a day. If you're on the East Coast and in daylight savings time, it would be 2 a.m., 8 a.m., 2 p.m., and 8 p.m. You do have the ability to scroll back using the controller here. So if I go back one outlook period to the 8 a.m. outlook, you'll notice that the color of this area potential formation in the Gulf was yellow at that time. So the chance of something happening is increasing from the 8 a.m. period, and so we'll continue to track that system. The legend at the bottom, you can collapse it at any time. If, as we add layers to it, you might find that it gets too tall, takes up too much space on your screen, and maybe you don't need it in the moment. So just know that there is a tiny little arrow in the center that allows you to collapse and expand it. Another thing to know about HURREVAC is, and this is true of anything that you have displayed in a web browser, is that you can make the icons and the text bigger or smaller by holding down the Control key on your Windows keyboard and pressing the plus button. So Control plus makes everything bigger. So now it's a little easier to read, or Control minus makes it smaller. Once you've adjusted and you want to get back to the original, usually your web browser will have an option inside of the URL box to hit reset, and it takes you back. There's usually it depends on your screen resolution, but there's some ideal that matches your eyesight, but also allows you to see all of the buttons and all of the toolbox items together. So I'm going to stick with the 100% magnification, the default, but just know that your web browser can be adjusted to have more or less on the screen at a time. So switching over from the Storms tab, I'm going to go to the Conditions tab and just turn on a few layers here so you can see what live layers look like in combination with the Tropical Weather Outlook. I'll turn on the current radar, and this is a layer coming from the National Weather Service. It's hitting a map service hosted by the National Weather Service, and this kind of matches up with the potential area of formation that is being tracked. You know, there's already some rain activity happening in South Texas. And then you also have satellite layer options. So if you're tracking something that's way offshore, such as this other area of potential formation, you would have to depend on the satellite layer to take a look at its shape and size instead of the radar. Now, the Tropical Weather Outlook is on by default. If you want to turn it off because you're looking at a specific storm and you no longer need to know about the other areas that might potentially form, you can do that yourself by clicking either on the X. So there's this controller here that allows you to change dates. You can click on the X for that controller, or you can go to the toolbox. So you'll notice in the toolbox that the Tropical Weather Outlook line is highlighted in blue. That means that's an indication that it's on. Now that I've just clicked on it, you can see that it's off. There are other menus in here that will trigger a slide out. Say the storm surge in the toolbox will trigger a slide out on the right-hand side. I can turn it back off. The evacuation timing tool will trigger a floating window, which I can move, similar to that Tropical Weather Outlook controller. So just know that usually there's an X for whatever has slid out or is floating on top, or you can go back into the toolbox itself to turn it off. Back over to the Storms tab, since we don't have any storms that are active right now anywhere in the world, and I am zooming out just using a pinch on my touch screen. You also can use a mouse wheel to zoom out, or you can use the plus and minus buttons here on the map itself to zoom out. Let's look at what storms have already occurred in this season. And you'll see quite a few if I scroll all the way down through the list. And this is an indication that HURREVAC is a worldwide tracking program. So we have had a few systems that the National Hurricane Center has already forecasted in the East Pacific. So Amanda and Boris and Christina have all occurred in the East Pacific. So I just turned all of them on at once here. You can kind of see where they all were, and looks like they were all just tropical storm strength at best. You're going to see a lot of 3 different colors in HURREVAC in different depictions. Blue indicates tropical storm strength threshold of 34 knots or 39 miles per hour. Yellow would indicate a strong tropical storm of 50 knots or 58 miles per hour. And red would indicate a hurricane or a typhoon of 64 knots or 74 miles per hour. So instead of keeping these 3 East Pacific storms on, I'm going to switch to one that was earlier in the season that was very significant to another part of the world, and that is Sinlaku. So Sinlaku, right now it's hard to tell where in the world Sinlaku affected, because we just have a big blue map of the ocean. This was a threat to Guam just a few months ago, and to kind of help us orient ourselves and understand where this storm went, I'm going to switch the base map. So down in the bottom right corner is a button called Base Maps. And by default in HURREVAC, when you're a brand new user and you haven't changed your user preferences, the base map is always going to be this light color canvas that's the bottom left option. But there are many other options you can play with, and they are good for different situations. We'll jump through them as we do this training in the next 3 to 4 days. But the one I'm going to switch to now is the classic map. And I think you'll immediately see why this map is handy if you're looking at a typhoon that impacted the Guam area of responsibility. So here's Guam, a little bit to the south of where Sinlaku actually ended up tracking. On some of the earlier advisories, there was some concern for Guam itself. But when this system went over a more central portion of the Mariana Islands, you can see by hovering here or clicking on it that it was a significant storm. So I'm clicking on one of the 6-hour advisory positions. This happens to be advisory number 23, and you can see the storm category was category 4 at that point. So HURREVAC is a worldwide tracking program. Even outside of the Atlantic season, you'll probably find things happening in the West Pacific or in the South Pacific. That's what's represented by the SP, or the South Indian Ocean, SI, or even the Arabian Sea. So lots of storms to track. The reason that HURREVAC encompasses those other regions is that the U.S. has some responsibility for the Guam and Samoa areas for these territories. So I just I went into the Resources tab and turned on the NWS West and South Pacific areas of responsibility. So you'll see here the areas that are covered. You can also see the areas of responsibility that the forecast centers cover. So everything from 180 degrees west and on over to Asia is the forecast responsibility of the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. And then the Southern Hemisphere is also forecast by the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. And then the Atlantic basins and the East Pacific and the Central Pacific basins are all covered by the National Hurricane Center. So if you were over looking at Sinlaku and you needed to get back to the East Coast, One way to do that is to click on this full map extent button here. It looks like a globe, and it's about halfway down in the set of map tools. And that'll jump you back to a more Atlantic focused area. I had already mentioned that you can use your mouse scroll wheel to zoom in and out, and you can use the plus and minus buttons on the map itself. You can also pick up the zoom tool and zoom into an area specifically with the magnifying glass. So I can zoom into Florida, for instance. I'll switch back to a different map that has more detail on it. This is back to the light color canvas map. And finally, you can go forward and back in map extents. Right under the magnifying glass is an option to go back to a previous map extent. So here was my previous map extent right before I zoomed into Florida. And then prior to that, here is the map extent where I was looking at Sinlaku. While we're still over here with in Sinlaku's area, I will mention that for ended storms, the system is going to load anytime you turn on the storm to show you all of the advisories, the full track of the storm. So everything from here where the storm formed well to the south, all the way up to near 30 degrees north, advisory 44 is a past track of the storm, and the colors that I mentioned earlier are represent where it was typhoon strength, if it was red, or strong tropical storm, yellow, or blue would be tropical storm strength. In this period where you see dots in between the colored squares, this is a forecast period. So right here is the initial position of advisory 44. I can highlight that a bit by turning on the wind field. So that is the very first button in the left edge strip of storm tools. And so now it shows the extent of tropical storm force winds and strong tropical storm force winds surrounding that wind field, surrounding that center position rather. All right. I'm going to turn off Sinlaku now and jump back over to the continental US and look a little bit at the conditions tab and finish up before the break with a few demonstrations of some other map manipulation tools that you can use combined with the conditions and the resources. So we looked at radar and satellite already. On day 3, you'll have a lot of information provided to you about flooding, both from freshwater threats and storm surge. There is a forecast rain layer, QPF, quantitative precipitation forecast, that will be explained. I'm just going to turn on the cumulative for days 1 through 7 here. And as that loads, you'll see how it corresponds. And remember, all of the conditions layers are just live layers. You'll see how it corresponds to the tropical weather outlook. Oh, the tropical weather outlook currently is matching Sinlaku, which is still on. So I need to turn off Sinlaku, I think. No. Or I can just hit today. Okay, there we go. We now have the two turned on together. You notice it's hard to see through the different colors here. We have a cumulative rainfall forecast. We have the tropical weather outlook on too. And then we might want to know, what's the edges of the coastline. And so I'm going to switch over to the Resources tab and check the very first layer. I find that I use this layer quite a bit, and it's called the State and County Borders. And now you can at least see the shape of Texas and the rest of the Gulf Coast relative to that rainfall layer that we have turned on. There are some further ways to control this and to make it look more clear as to what you're trying to communicate. Those are accessed through the Quick Layers option, and then I'm going to show you how to do some clipping too. So a couple of buttons that are on opposite sides of the program. First, the Quick Layers options. We'll make the map really big and turn on Quick Layers. And you'll see that any layers that are turned on the map right now are adjustable here in terms of their opacity. So I could really dial up the tropical weather outlook, for instance, make it brighter. I could make the state and county outlines brighter as well. I could perhaps dial back the rainfall forecast. You might also find that there's a better base map that still more clearly shows the land and the details of the cities below it. But this is how you control the opacity or the transparency of these layers that are turned on. You can also control their drawing order. So if I had turned on the tropical weather outlook before the forecast rainfall, it would have appeared below it, and I might have wanted to shift it up. Perhaps I want to do that right now with the forecast rain and see how it shifts. And then finally, another thing you can control here or change about your display is if you want to clip out all of the rain that is over water, you can clip it using the scissors tool that's on the right edge, about halfway down in the map tools. And you can clip to the United States or to a specific state. I'll just clip to the continental United States. And now you have a graphic that sort of depicts the rainfall effects that might occur from this potential area of formation here. New for this year, and this will probably be further elaborated on in the later days on day 3. Anytime you hover over a certain area of the quantitative precipitation forecast, you can see the amounts of rain showing up in along with your cursor. And here's my next tip for using HURREVAC. If you have a lot of things turned on at once, you could go around and figure out where to turn them off. For instance, remember that the tropical weather outlook is turned off by hitting it here in the toolbox or up here, or even under map layers. There are some layers you can turn off that way, such as the forecast rain. But another way to quickly turn things off and get your program refreshed is by hitting reload. So when you hit reload, remember things that are on by default are the tropical weather outlook, unless you've changed your preference for a base map inside of user preferences. That is going to go back to the light color canvas. And then there are going to be various things that are labeled on the tracking map that are configured to go back to the default. And you won't have any storms turned on unless there is an active storm in the Atlantic. Atlantic storms are turned on by default. All other basins are left off, but they would have appeared here under the active storms heading if there was something being tracked somewhere else in the world. I hadn't yet hit this notifications button here in the top right edge, so I'll go ahead and click on it now. Notice it's got a red dot on it because I haven't checked it recently and there's something new. So in this case, the new information is just reminding us that the webinar series is going on this week, and here's how to sign up or watch the recordings afterwards. This is what's called a passive notification. It just appears as a red dot that you can opt to open. You don't have to open it and read it. These messages are set to expire after the appropriate amount of time, so you don't have to clear them out of your inbox. Occasionally, you will also see active notifications appear where they just pop up on the screen in the moment that something is happening. And they oftentimes have something to do with a storm situation. So say there's a special advisory that's been issued, or there's new storm surge products available that have just started up. So pay attention and watch for active notifications in the program, as well as passive ones that just appear symbolized by that red dot. So now we're really going to get into the meat of how to analyze a storm using the advisory information. Once the tropical weather outlook starts tracking something, and then it develops enough, or it's a threat to land within a short amount of time, the Hurricane Center will begin issuing numbered advisories every 6 hours for the storm. And so to look at a storm like that and start to understand the different products that are available, we're going to load a storm from the archives, and I'm going to choose Milton. Milton was a significant storm for Florida, the state of Florida, in 2004. So if you type in the search box under the Storms tab, Milton, you should have it show up under 2004 storms, and then you can check it on. Now, just like with Sinlaku earlier, because this is an ended storm, you'll see the entire track, all of those earlier advisories. The very last advisory that was issued as Milton was post-tropical and dissipating, and then ahead of that would be the forecast track. We want to go back and look at earlier advisories of Milton, and there are various ways to do that in the program. One is to work with the storm status bar that appears across the top anytime you have a storm loaded. And you can click on the advisory portion of the storm status bar, and you can see all of the advisories that appeared before that. Notice there are some that are not just straight numbers, but then there's intermediates that are called A. I'll get to that in a second here. So I went all the way back to advisory 1. In advisory 1, at that point, the system was just a depression. It wouldn't have even had the name Milton. So there were no maximum sustained winds were less than 39 miles per hour. But then very quickly with advisory 2, if I go just to the right of that advisory selection to switch to advisory 2 with the right arrow, now we're on advisory 2. We do have tropical storm force winds, which means if I go over to turn on the forecast wind field again, you'll see the extent of the winds appear on the map. In advisory 3 and 4, and then 3A. Now, why do we have a 3A, not just a 4? The reason we have a 3A is that beginning with advisory 3, Milton, Tropical Storm Milton already had watches and warnings being issued associated with it. And so what were those watches and warnings? We are going to get into that a lot more tomorrow when with the wind topics, and then on Wednesday with the storm surge topics. But if you want to quickly understand what kinds of watches and warnings were associated with Milton, starting with advisory 3, you could open the text advisories section of the toolbox. So if you have a specific advisory loaded on the map for Milton, when you click the text advisories, this is a floating window. And so I can move it over to the side and take a look at what was going on starting with advisory 3. And I will see here that here's the changes with this advisory and the watches and warnings. The government of Mexico has issued a tropical storm watch for the northern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. So that is the reason that once watches and warnings are in effect, there will be intermediate advisory updates. These intermediate advisory updates do not change the forecast track. So ahead of ahead of the initial position of the storm, this forecast track from Advisory 3 did not change when you went to Advisory 3A. The only thing that changed was an update to the current location of the storm, the center of the storm, and its maximum wind. So if that had changed between Advisory 3 and 3A, that would be reflected here. So primarily, when we're looking at timing and looking at all of the different kinds of products that you can get from each advisory, you'll mostly be focused on the main advisory numbers. So Advisory 3 to Advisory 4, and so on. So if we look at each advisory, what are the issuance times and how often do they come out? Typically, unless there's a special advisory that's issued because, say, some new information has been gleaned from a flight through the system or some other piece of information, you'll get new numbered advisories every 6 hours. And so for the East Coast, those important critical times to be opening HURREVAC and looking at new information are 5 a.m. So you see this Advisory 4 is from 5 a.m. And then Advisory 4A would be at 8 a.m., so just 3 hours later. But the next main advisory with a new forecast track would be at 11 a.m. So 5 and 11, 5 a.m., 11 a.m., 5 p.m., and 11 p.m. are the 4 times a day in which the Hurricane Center is going to be putting out new advisories for any system that is being tracked. So on the map here, we see a kind of a confusing display. We see a lot of dots and a lot of lines, and so what this means is that this is an ended storm. We know the track, the actual track ahead that the storm took. That's depicted with the solid line with all the red squares. And then we have the forecast track. This would have been if we were on Sunday, October 6th at 11 a.m., the best information we would have had available to us would have been this dotted line here with these more spaced out squares. And so in order to make our HURREVAC display during this training look like it would have in that moment on October 6th, we're going to next work within the track and swath options. And so that's over here on the left edge, about 3/4 of the way down. It looks like a gear with those colored squares surrounding it. So if you click on that, and then it's a floating window, so you can move it off to the side a little bit. And I'll move the storm over here. There's a lot of options in track and swath, in this track and swath section. The first one is the one I'm going to introduce to you right now. So notice as I uncheck the very first box under track and swath options called Actual Track Ahead, that makes our display a lot clearer in terms of this is the information that we would have had available to us at this time if this was a live storm. Now, there are many other things you can change in here. For instance, down here in this bottom section, you can change the way that the wind rings are depicted. Currently, they're set to be these filled circles. But as the storm gets closer to land, I kind of like the outlines instead, which means I can kind of see the map below a little better. So I tend to leave it on the open solid line rings, or you can switch to dashed lines as well. The labels along the track are customizable too. So the labels can be completely turned off. That's within track and swath options. Or you can customize what goes into the labels. Say you wanted to have the speed at which the storm is tracking. You want that information on the labels as well. So that last checkbox for forward speed and direction will add to the labels. Or you could change it to be the date or the maximum sustained winds if you don't want just the storm category, but you want the max winds in there too. Lots of options in there. Anytime you make a change and you feel like this is the kind of depiction that you want to have be your default selections, there's a button at the very bottom of the track and swath options. If you click that, save these preferences for future sessions, it will remember that you prefer open rings like I do, and then always have that on by default. So we've been turning on the forecast wind fields. It helps to show you the initial position of the storm. We'll also turn on the potential track area. I'm going to skip over the wind swath and let John Boyer demonstrate that tomorrow and explain it. But the potential track area, just because the error cone is just so baked into our the way we look at storms, I will talk about this. Also, Dr. Brennan talked about changes that are coming this season to the error cone. And so this error cone is from past years, and so it represents within a 2/3 confidence interval, basically within the last 5 years of forecasting, where the storms go, where the center of the storm tracks. 2/3 of the time, the center has stayed somewhere in this cone area. And so that means quite a large portion of the state of Florida could have the largest impacts from the storm tracking directly over it. Starting this year, this cone for 2026 season storms will just be white. It won't have a differentiation between the 3-day period. So this is the first 3 days of the forecast track. And then this is the extended 4 and the 5-day track. Starting this year, it will just be a simple white cone. And then later in the season, as we get some new product information surrounding the inland watches and warnings, we'll start to put them on the HURREVAC map too. There will probably be an added option in this section of the storm tools for turning on those inland wind watches and warnings. There will probably also be an added section in the potential track area that we just turned on to just simply turn on the cone. But those are not yet in HURREVAC because we will need to have a few advisories worth of data from a live storm before that can be incorporated. But that is coming. All right, advancing ahead in Milton's advisories, I'm going to go all the way to advisory 12. And you can click the right arrow on the storm status bar, but you can also use your keyboard's right arrow. So now I'm going to move off of that storm status bar and just use the keyboard to advance to advisory 12. You can go back in advisories with the left arrow of your keyboard or forward with the right. So with this advisory on, what we're looking at here is, the potential area in which the center of the storm could track, but also a deterministic forecast of where the storm may be in 12 hours, in 24 hours, in 36, in 48. So this is the 48-hour position. It's just 45 hours into the forecast period, since the advisories are put out 3 hours after the models are run. But basically, 2 days out is what we're looking at with this position here. And then this is the 60-hour and the 72 or 3-day forecast position. And then these extended forecasts have a little bit less detail, but increasingly they have more. They even have deterministic winds at this point, at least for the tropical storm force wind fields. So the blue ring of winds, if you advance the storm along the forecast track, so instead of advancing to a new advisory, this time I'm going to stay within advisory 12, and I'm going to simply advance the storm along the forecast track. And you'll see this deterministic depiction of where the storm's going to go and how big the wind fields are going to get as I'm advancing through Advisory 12's forecast. We'll talk a lot about deterministic versus probabilistic forecasting in the coming days. Just know that deterministic means this is just one possibility. It's the best guess, but the cone is showing us and reminding us that really the center of the storm could track further to the east or north or further to the west than what this center line is depicting here. So as I advance the storm out the forecast advisory period, again, as you might have guessed, I could use the left and right arrows to go to the next advisory. I can use the up and down arrows on my keyboard to advance the storm along its forecast track. So here's the point, and we're just starting with the deterministic depiction of wind timing because it's kind of easier to conceptualize. But here's the point at which the tropical storm force winds would begin to touch the state of Florida, right around hour 36 or 37. You see that blue ring of winds is now about hour 37, touching inside of this over the state of Florida. HURREVAC for evacuation planning and emergency managers are usually guided by the start of the tropical storm force winds. So we are of course concerned with hurricane wind damage and some of the timing and severity of course of the hurricane winds, but for our preparations we want to have the public already safely evacuated ahead of the start of the tropical storm force winds. So what this is saying is if the tropical storm force winds are going to start in 37 hours, that means that if I'm looking at Advisory 12 and I'm looking at the severity of the forecast, I'm going to go back and put this storm category on, knowing that it's forecast to be possibly a Category 4, so a major storm, and the hazards are going to begin in 37 hours. What kinds of preparations do I need to do, and how long will those take me? And so at the heart of HURREVAC's job and what it's supposed to do for the local emergency manager is help you figure out which of these advisories that are coming out every 6 hours do I need to base my decision making on? Can I afford to wait for Advisory 13 for whatever action I need to take for Pinellas County, Florida, or do I need to go off of Advisory 12's information? And so there are timing tools in HURREVAC, and this is an advanced portion of the program, but I want to hit it today, just touch upon it so that you have a feel for what kinds of additional tools that you have access to, and if you stick around for Thursday's training, you will learn about. So under evacuation timing, there's something called timeline actions, and you can set a timeline action for a specific location. So say I'm going to set it for Pinellas County, Florida. And I'm going to make this an 18-hour action. Perhaps it takes me 18 hours to evacuate the local animal shelter. And then I'm going to plug in the 18 hours and add a timeline action. And then on the timing arc section, I'll turn that on. So what this is doing is based upon the forward speed of the storm. Now I mentioned that forward speed was important and I like to have it on the labels. The average forward speed of the storm multiplied by the number of hours that I just put into that preparatory action that I need to take. It's drawing a ring. And so as I advance the storm along its forecast track, this ring is a depiction of any time the tropical storm force winds are inside of the ring. That's the period in which I would need to be actually evacuating that animal shelter. So from this point on, 25 hours into the forecast period, all the way to landfall, and when the storm, is beyond me, these are my action periods. By this point, you would want to be finished. You would want to be finished basically at hour 37, but between hours 25 and 37, that's your 18 hours for action. So that's one way of using HURREVAC for timing purposes, for fine-tuning which advisory you need to base your decision making on. Because we still have more than a day left before this action would need to be initiated, you could afford to perhaps wait for a later advisory. Of course, you'll want to be cognizant of the time of day. Some of these advisories come in the middle of the night when you're probably, especially if it's a public evacuation, you're not likely to be able to get the attention of the public and practically start an evacuation at that hour. So HURREVAC lets you kind of fine-tune your evacuation action start times and figure out which advisory those should be based on. And then just like we were over in the text advisory section previously, there are many key products that you would want to be reading here as you take a look at the very latest advisory. So there's always going to be, in the public advisory, there will be a headline, and so it updates what's new or most significant. Today is the last full day for Florida residents and their families to evacuate. So even the Hurricane Center is telling the state of Florida, it's time. This is the last full day. And then it will describe all of the types of watches and warnings that are in effect, storm surge and wind. And then there's a hazards affecting land section, in which it goes through each type of hazard and describes just how bad they could be in text form, very specific amounts of storm surge or ranges of storm surge for different areas. There are various ways of depicting these kinds of things on the map as well. So I won't belabor this for today. That will be for future days. There's also a forecast discussion, which talks about the level of confidence that the forecasters have in this particular advisory. If there had been any deviation in the track or the intensity from the last advisory, you might have seen that appear there. All right, so going into, I promised to introduce points of interest, and they will be covered in future days in more detail and how you can apply them. But I do want to put some points of interest on the map just to kind of give you a teaser. I went ahead and added some points of interest to my user profile already, but I will turn those on, and then I'll show you how to add another one. So the points of interest that I added to the map were kind of inland areas. Say I was a regional planner for the juvenile facilities. I turned on or added to HURREVAC's map all of these different facilities, and then to show you how to add one yourself. But let's say I wanted to add a juvenile facility that's in Gulfport. I can right-click on the map and create a point of interest. And at this point, it asks me to give it a name. And then there's something called type, and the types can be anything you type in. And I made a brand new type today when I was setting up this example called JV facility. You'll see some earlier ones that I created myself. And then these ones that are in all capitals, those are included in the program by default because they have special functionality, especially the surge flags and the wind timing flags. But I'm going to go ahead and label this also as a JV facility and add it. The types are used for filtering. They can also be used to style the points differently if you want them to be different colors on the map. So now I've just added Gulfport to the map as well. And you know, you can create a briefing display that includes these kinds of labels, or you can use them in reports, or you can even center your timing arc around that. I centered my timing arc on Pinellas County, but I could have centered it on one of these many points of interest that are already in the program. Previously, I had set my base location to Richmond, Virginia. I'm going to, at this point for this scenario, go ahead and set it for Pinellas County, and I will pick one of the areas near that Gulfport facility, and I'm going to set my base location. So there's that base location flag that appears, and I'm going to also give you a teaser for some of the other functionality that's coming in the next few days. One being taking a look at all of the evacuation zones in your area. So here are those evacuation zones depicted for Pinellas County, Florida, for different storm situations. Another would be the storm surge forecast. There are different products that you can look at. This is the basin. This is the West Florida Gulf Basin, West Florida Basin, and here is the extent of it. There is modeling that's available that's associated with this basin for storm surge of any kind of storm, not just this specific one here. And that would be accessible through the side panel here. You can turn on things like the National Storm Surge Flooding Map. So if a Cat 4 storm is possible for this, and I want to know, is that facility that I've just marked in Gulfport potentially in a storm surge area, I can click Display on Map. And here's where I'm going to use the previous map extent button to get back a little bit. And so for that location that I marked for Gulfport, it looks like, yes, indeed, it is in a Category 4 storm surge area. Could have as much as 4 or 5 feet of storm surge, maybe as much as 7 or 8 in that area, based upon some terrible direction and forward speed of Category 4 strength. So lots of further layers to drill down into and analysis capabilities coming in the next few days. So I just wanted to give you a teaser on the some of the advanced functionality that will be covered later. All right, so to wrap up today's training, let's see how we can get this information out of HURREVAC. And I will go back and turn on the error cone, because this is good for emphasizing, hey, this entire large section of Central Florida is under the potential track of the center of the storm. And here are my assets that are inside of that potential track. Here's one that's outside of that, but could still have wind effects if the storm tracks, the center tracks as far north as this. These labels on the map, you know, we had reviewed in the track and swath options how to change what goes into the labels. Also be aware that once you've got your map looking the way you want in terms of its zoom level and the layers that are turned on, you can adjust where the labels appear on the map by clicking and dragging them. They will go back to their original positions once you change advisories or if you zoom and pan around enough. So make this one of the last steps that you do. before you're ready to get this information out of HURREVAC and into a graphic. There are a few ways to get a graphic out of HURREVAC. One of them is to hit the print button and export the map as a graphic, an image file. But the method that I prefer on my Windows machine is to use the Windows snipping tool. So if you do a search on Windows and you type snipping tool, or perhaps you have your favorite screen capture tool, I keep mine right here on the taskbar, and I click New. When I click and drag here like this to capture a specific area of the web browser, then it creates a very nice image that includes all of the information that I wanted to have depicted in exactly a specific map area. So I'm going to hit Control-C to copy that, and then I had opened a just a plain Word document, and then I can paste it in there. So here's the start of a a report that I want to send out. You'd have to give it a title, for instance. You can also get out of HURREVAC the we suggest that you include the public advisory information, or at least the headlines for the storm. So the way to get that information out is to simply block and copy it. So Control-C, and then you could put that inside of here as well. And so this could go into an email or into a document and then be sent off. The final shortcut way of doing this, again, it's not quite as precise in terms of what you're capturing of the screen, is this storm summary tool. So it's down here in the utilities section. It's called Storm Summary. And so what it does is it captures the map as well as the text, and it puts it into a new tab, which for some reason it didn't take it. I think my tab is on another screen. I've got multiple monitors here going. Given that we are close to the top of the hour, and I want to see if the moderators have fielded any questions that they feel like should be addressed to the audience, I think I'll stop here and see how we can wrap up today's presentation.
Okay, so there's a question about, once you save a location, is it good forever or just for that storm?
Yeah, that's a great question. So points of interest can be controlled within this map marker. There are 3 options there, but if you go to the points of interest one, you might have seen these pop up as I right-clicked and added a point. But you can turn them off this way, and you can actually delete them. So any of them that are selected here, if I hit delete selection, they will actually be removed from my profile. And so now I only have these other 2 still remaining in there. And then there are ways to customize your points of interest styles here. So I could assign one color to animal shelters, another color to JV facilities, and so on. So yes, user preferences combined with points of interest interface that's accessible under this map marker here make it quite flexible.
Karen, another question is about, is there a quick clear to clear all selections and start over? So that's, on the left side, you can show that, I guess.
Yeah, there is a map reset button or reset storm tools. I would say that we need to do some further work on it to make it really super useful. My favorite approach for clearing things is just to simply hit reload, because I will know that my screen will come back. If there was an active storm in the Atlantic, it would come up to the very latest advisory, and any kind of user preferences that I had saved here, and track and swath options, any kind of points of interest and base locations would all still be there, but I would be starting from a fresh session of HURREVAC. So just reload, browser reload is my favorite approach.
All right. Another question is, two questions actually. One is they want to see what the small system that we looked at earlier today looks like on the tropical weather outlook. And
maybe turn on the radar layer too.
Sure.
Yep.
Is there a limit to the number of points of interest you can have at one time?
Oh, another good question. Technically, no. I would say after you get past 50 to 100, it gets a little unwieldy. If you're managing that many points of interest, maybe taking information out of HURREVAC and putting it in a GIS program makes more sense. Another way to manage large data sets is to bring them in and out of HURREVAC. So there's an import and an export button. So if you were to create a big data set with another program, say a GIS program, you can import them. And if they have types associated with them, maybe you could import them back and forth depending on the current storm situation and which assets you're most concerned about in one storm versus another. But we typically recommend not to go above, say, 100 points of interest, because there's just your map, and when you run reports, it might slow things down. So thank you for all those great questions. If I could end the day with a couple of tests of your knowledge, I think that would be a fantastic finish. And so to do that, I'm going to turn on the next two polls. We'll start with this one here. Hopefully you picked up on what all the default information is that's turned on when you open HURREVAC. Okay, so you all are doing really well. Pretty much everyone knew that the tropical weather outlook is on by default in almost all cases. Very occasionally, if there's a really big storm that's being tracked in the Atlantic, we will behind the scenes have the tropical weather outlook off so that you don't have this extra layer in the legend and information about areas that aren't really of concern because they're way out in the ocean when you're so focused, on a storm such as Milton that was about to impact the coast of the US. So occasionally tropical weather outlook will still be turned off. The track of active Atlantic storms, yes, that is definitely on by default. Your custom points of interest, those will be saved in your profile, but they will not be on by default until you go into the map marker and check the box for displaying them. Important notifications, yes, indeed, those will be displayed if there's some critical piece of information about a special advisory or storm surge products. Those will certainly pop up on top of your map. And then radar animation, most of you guessed correctly that is not on by default. Okay, and then the final, I know we are past the top of the hour, so I'll just very quickly launch this one. This question, it has to do with what parts of HURREVAC can you customize? So remember, these are things that are going to get stored in your user profile on the remote server. All you need is your username and password to log in and have access again and have the program behave in a way that you indicated was your preference previously. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Here, this was a great finish. You all have been a great audience, really paying attention. Yes, base location is something that's set, as are your track and swath options. If you press that button at the very bottom of track and swath options, then those labels will always be the way you prefer. Time zone I didn't even cover. But you all guessed correctly that is something that is included because most of you, 91% of you, said all of the above are parts of HURREVAC that you can customize. The time zone setting is something that is inside of the user preferences, and it is under map settings, and it's right here. Most of the time, for most of us, matching the device settings, so whatever your computer's system clock is set to is what you want. But if you're a FEMA person sitting in DC and you're making briefing maps for the state of Hawaii, you probably want to put your time zone for HURREVAC's legend in the Hawaiian time, and that's possible to do outside of having to change your entire computer's time zone. So yeah, great job, everyone. Thank you for your attention today. I hope you got some new information, whether you're an existing user of HURREVAC or brand new. Hopefully we didn't overwhelm you. Come back for days 2, 3, and 4, and have a good evening. Thank you.